When news of the Death Star's destruction reached the rest of the Empire, a form of panicked chaos began to set in. Within days of its activation, the entire battle station had been lost, and many of the top military leaders of the Empire had been killed, including Tarkin, who was the most important of them all. Most significantly, instead of eradicating the rebellion, the Empire had succeeded only in invigorating their cause and handing them a tremendous victory. The Empire was now fully at war and had lost the first two major engagements of the conflict. More critically, the strategy that had guided military decisions for years had collapsed. Significant vacuums had opened within the Imperial command infrastructure, and the military had no overarching plan for fighting the war they were now locked into. For this video, I want to jump into the canon book The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire to look at how Emperor Palpatine and the rest of the Empire reacted to the destruction of the Death Star. While the Empire would suffer far more devastating military defeats in the years to come, the disaster at Yavin threw much of the Imperial military into a state of almost panicked chaos. While there was a sizable contingent within the Imperial fleet, including Darth Vader, who were very happy to see the Death Star fail so spectacularly, its destruction and the deaths of so many senior leaders only exacerbated the existing problems within the armed forces. The entirety of Imperial military strategy had been built around the planned implementation of the Death Star, with the likes of Grand Moff Tarkin leading the way. Stripped of both the battle station and the man who was effectively leading the military response to the Rebel Alliance, how was the Empire supposed to react? Furthermore, the problems were not simply restricted to Yavin. The defeat of Grand Admiral Thrawn at Lothal and the destruction of much of the 7th Fleet had robbed the Empire of another senior military strategist. While the post-Yavin period saw the Empire embarking on an aggressive series of operations to try and hunt down various rebel headquarters, there were serious questions regarding how much that represented a coherent strategy, as opposed to a response born out of the reflexive desire to try and do something to force a speedy resolution to the conflict. The fact that Darth Vader was not immediately given control of anti-rebel operations indicated how the Emperor held him personally responsible for the Death Star's destruction. As a form of punishment and insult, Vader was placed under the command of Grand General Tag. Despite this, Vader's own star did rise in the months that followed until he effectively became the face of the Imperial effort to find and destroy the Rebel Alliance, and as a result became a much more publicly recognized figure. Interestingly, the Emperor himself became even more reclusive after the destruction of the Death Star at Yavin. His trips away from Coruscant had become increasingly rare even before the Galactic Civil War had began, but now, following the destruction of his long-prized weapon and the death of Tarkin, he seemed to have withdrawn into his palace on Coruscant to an even greater extent than usual. Some in his inner circle questioned whether this was due to an increased paranoia around his own safety. What is clear, though, is that the war would now have to be waged by the Imperial fleet, despite the ongoing splits over strategy within its surviving leadership and significant concerns about the effectiveness of many officers who held their posts for political reasons. The Navy was able to greatly expand its own sense of control over the war effort, including taking control of intelligence operations as the ISB and other more political organizations suffered a loss of esteem and influence following their perceived failures. However, serious questions remained regarding whether the fleet was really a weapon that could adequately combat a rebellion that was buoyed by a series of unexpected victories. To deepen the issues facing the Empire, the nature of the rebel victory at Yavin and the fallout of the destruction of Alderaan were causing serious ripples across the galaxy. With the battle lines being drawn, it became apparent that what had once been a steady trickle of recruits joining the Alliance was suddenly becoming a veritable flood, as Remember Alderaan became a rallying cry on countless worlds. Worse still, a number of these recruits were defecting from the Galactic Empire. One of the most difficult lessons the Empire had to learn in the immediate aftermath of the battles at Scarif and Yavin was the extent to which virtually everything they had previously believed about the Rebel Alliance was wrong. While some officers and military leaders had recognized the growing threat of the rebellion, it was widely accepted that this enemy lacked the substantial capital ships and firepower to adequately threaten the Empire in a pitched battle. The size of the rebel fleet at Scarif had caught Admiral Gorin almost completely by surprise. Furthermore, the rebels appeared to be gathering starfighter assets quicker than had been thought possible. Although some of these ships, like the Y-Wing, were thought to be obsolete since the Clone Wars, the rebels were finding ways of making them a viable resource in battle. The number of X-Wings that were deployed at Lothal, Scarif, and then Yavin also suggested that the Rebel Alliance had its own infrastructure that allowed for the production of these fighters and enough spare parts to keep them operational. While the production capacity of Kuat alone absolutely dwarfed what the rebels could undertake, the Alliance clearly had access to factories, shipyards, and resources that the Empire had failed to identify. However, while weapons and other military materiel would be crucial for the Alliance going forward, it was not their most important resource. X-Wings and Mon Calamari cruisers were effectively useless without individuals to pilot and crew them. Before Yavin, the Rebel Alliance had been the recipients of various types of volunteers. However, following the destruction of Alderaan, defections from the Empire rose enormously. Once the truth emerged about the Death Star's destruction of Alderaan, many of those serving abandoned their posts. Some simply slipped away into the wider galactic population and became part of the transitory groups of Alderaanians who were now refugees. But others made their way into the ranks of the Rebel Alliance, determined to fight to liberate the galaxy from Imperial tyranny. Rather than quelling the population of the galaxy, the use of the Death Star had greatly increased the number of enemies to Imperial rule. With their forces now in disarray, Imperial strategy after Yavin hinged upon whoever could take control of the situation. In the time following the Battle of Yavin, Darth Vader achieved a resurgence within the Imperial hierarchy after stopping an attempted coup by an Imperial cybernetic expert named Silo. Not only did Vader demonstrate his continued worth to the Emperor, but he also undermined General Tag's command of the Imperial military and security forces. The reward for those efforts was for Palpatine to elevate Vader to the position of Supreme Commander of the Imperial fleet. This included personal control of the Super Star Destroyer Executor and the vaunted Death Squadron Task Force. Vader's first action in his new role was to use the Force to choke Tag to death. Vader's control of the Imperial military after Yavin would cause some significant problems, but his new position did solve some as well. One significant benefit for overall military strategy was that Vader was utterly focused on finding the rebels, though for very different reasons than the rest of the fleet. As a result, the need to chase down pirate threats became a much less pressing concern. Vader also had his own relationships with the various crime bosses and underworld kingpins who operated around the Empire and presumably made explicitly clear to them what the price for preying on Imperial shipping would mean. While other Imperial leaders may have been susceptible to bribes or blackmail, Darth Vader was clearly not among them, and fear of summary execution at his hands could be a powerful motivator. There were, however, notable strategic shortcomings from placing overall control into Darth Vader's hands. Given that Vader took little interest in orders passed down from anyone but the Emperor, his interactions with the Joint Chiefs were limited and he seemed content to let them organize things from behind the scenes as long as they did not encroach on his own plans. Vader cared little for administrative matters or wider-scale strategy. The result was that Vader demanded operations to locate the rebel base be exponentially increased, but then passed the task of making his orders feasible to the Joint Chiefs and others in the upper echelons of command, with the implicit threat of what failure would mean. Because of this, while Vader pushed forward with a single-mindedness that bordered on the obsessive in his hunt for the rebellion, the rest of the fleet found itself dragged along for the ride, forced to constantly react to whatever Vader was doing or commanding in any given situation. As probe droids scoured the Outer Rim for signs of the rebel base, Vader's impatience and anger only grew. In time, it would lead to the Empire's victory at the Battle of Hoth. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. And as always, may the Force be with you.